Welcome. Thank you for coming to College Conversations this evening. Go get your favorite beverage, get your comfy seat, and get ready to go on a great ride with us this night. So thank you, parents. Thank you, guardians. Yes, we know that we have some students out there too. Thank you for being here to learning about the college process. So I want to say once again, welcome to St. Ignatius, a college conversation with you tonight. I'm Ana Maria Bacar. I'm one of 5 of the SI's college counselors, and all combined, we have over 75 years of experience counseling amazing students. And we know that we need more wisdom and information. And that's why this evening, we have people from the West, the middle of the country, all the way to the East Coast to help you understand this new era post-pandemic about admissions. Well, we'll talk about things like the testing landscape that's out there, understanding how admissions works because there's so many different directions to look at. And then what is it that the colleges are really looking at? This is insider information that we are getting. I have one of my great colleagues that's going to be here. So while I take your Q&As, let's hear it up for the one and only Patrick Lorenzo.
Good evening, buenas noches, magandang hapon, magandang gabi to you lahat. Mr. Lorenzo, one of the college counselors, and I will be the main face and host tonight. And we're very grateful to have our team of decision makers from around the country to share some insight and perspective of the admissions process. Pass the mic over to my friend and colleague in Texas to get us rolling, Mr. Heath.
Thanks, Pilo, and good evening, everybody. And I'm so excited to be here with you. My name is Heath Einstein. I am Dean of Admission at Texas Christian University in beautiful Fort Worth, Texas, where this week it was about 85 degrees, very comfortable, and we're enjoying a beautiful pre-spring. If you are not familiar with TCU, and it's possible all you know about us is that we have a pretty darn good football team. There is a lot more to our university than meets the eye. TCU is a university with about 12,000 students total, 10,500 of whom are at the undergraduate level. So we are, by pretty much any measure, a mid-sized university. We're a comprehensive liberal arts and sciences university with wonderful pre-professional programs. And what that means is students can choose between about 130 different areas of study, but all of them will complete our core curriculum because we think it's really important to have a broad understanding of the world around you. The world is moving really rapidly, and to be pigeonholed into just one area of expertise really will limit you when you're looking at careers in the future that don't presently exist. I think the distinguishing feature of TCU is, as I indicated earlier, we're almost all at the undergraduate level. And so while on the one hand, you get this sort of classic Americana collegiate experience, rah-rah, school spirit, high Division I athletics, if you compare us with other institutions that sort of meet those criteria, we skew very heavily on the undergraduate side. And it's probably not something that most high school students think about. But what it means in reality is that you come to a school like TCU and you get the advantages of a bigger place, but the kinds of connections that you typically see at schools that are much smaller than we are. Our faculty will know you by name, and they're going to see if you're not in class. So if you're looking for anonymity, TCU probably is not the best place for you. But if you're looking to come to a place where you can forge meaningful relationships with faculty and staff and your fellow students, this is it. The other thing to note, of course, is we are Texas Christian University. So we have an affiliation with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And to understand what Christianity or religious life is at TCU really requires a basic understanding of that particular Protestant denomination. And it is this idea of faith with reason. And it's an ecumenical faith. And so for that reason, we have students on our campus who are comprised of dozens of different faith communities. One not need to be Christian to be at TCU, but of course there is a lot of fellowship for students who are looking for a strong religious life. So I will leave it at that, and and pass it to my colleagues.
All right, thank you, Heath. Let's go from Texas over to Hawaii to Miss Nikki.
Mahalo nui, colleagues. Aloha mai kako. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you in this conversation. My name is Nikki Chun, and I'm the Vice Provost of Enrollment Management at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. The University of Hawaii at Manoa is one of 10 campuses in the University of Hawaii system. We are the flagship Research One university within the system itself, and we are located in the verdant valley of Manoa. You know, Heath, I'm sorry, I might get to one up you on weather, because I mean, it's raining here, but then that passes and then we get rainbows. Otherwise, it's kind of just 70 degrees and like sunny. So yes, Fort Worth is great. If you're looking at location, Hawaii's not a bad place to check out too. One of the reasons I absolutely treasure being here at the University of Hawaii isn't just location, of course. It is that students are able to access a really incredible educational experience within this environment that we offer. UH Manoa is distinctively, as I mentioned, a Research One university that offers a wide breadth of academic opportunities for our students from undergraduate through graduate programs, inclusive of some micro-credentials. So if people are looking to kind of build on an existing career, we can offer quite a bit of that too. And we offer things in areas that you may not find all together in many places in the world. So if students are looking for careers in sustainability, in oceans research, conservation, then this is one of the best places that you could study these things. And all of this together at an institution that really seeks to become and values becoming a Native Hawaiian place of learning. So we recognize that we are very much beholden not only to the residents of Hawaii, but also to Native Hawaiians that are, whether it's in the state of Hawaii or on the continent. So if I happen to be talking to any Native Hawaiian families out there and you're looking to give your student a reason to come back home, then call me. But so in that light, as I shared this sort of great landscape of where we are, I also just wanted to share, and I'll sort of conclude with this saying that's on the slide here, "O ke kahua mamua mahope ke kukulu," which is a Hawaiian wise a saying. It's really about laying the foundation first, and then practicing the wisdom that you have. So if you're looking for a place to be able to really grow and learn and practice that wisdom, then come on over to UH Manoa. So I will end there and pass it back to my colleague.
Thank you very much, Nikki. So from the island to across the country over to DC, Mr. Ben, the floor is yours.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm happy to be with you. My name is Ben Toll. I'm the Dean of Undergraduate Admissions at the George Washington University. And so as I was kind of picking out this slide, Nikki had already uploaded her slide. I was like, how am I going to follow the beauty of Hawaii? And so I decided you had such natural beauty. I said, well, what is something that is, humans have put together? And so I chose the Lincoln Memorial for a number of different reasons. One, when you are on our campus, we're a campus of about 10,000 undergraduate students. And what's, quite unique about our institution is we're not just located in the city, but we are truly a part of the fabric of the city. So when you walk across 23rd Street, as you're going to class, you look down the street, the Lincoln Memorial is what you see. Our students wake up and they're quite honestly 3 blocks from the White House. This is a place where students come of all different interests to find ways to put it into action and connect it to the real world. Our students will blend an academic experience with a professional experience as they're exploring their passions. I think a lot of times from afar, students think about coming to DC and they think about politics or international affairs, and that obviously makes sense because it's what you see in the news. But we're a place where we need great science researchers to be doing the work of study and trying to find out what is true and trying to find out what is significant to be able to influence the policy conversation, right? And so our students will be active in the labs, will be working with their faculty members, but then in the afternoon, they're jumping across town and they're going to an internship. They're going to Capitol Hill. They're going to law firms or research institutes or, defense contractors, you name it. They're all using this as an opportunity to fine tune. And so when you start at GW, one of the nice perks that you get is you not only are a GW student, but we actually give you a Metro card, which gives you unlimited use to the Metro system so that you can get all across the city without ever having to think about it. I live myself about 8-9 miles from campus, and I'm in an office, there's about 20 of us. 2 people drive to work, right? It's just a different culture, right? That our students, our community are all using the Metro to get about the city and such. And we want you to have that unlimited access to the city as you spend your time here, right? This is a place where we want you going to class, we want you connecting to faculty members, but I also want you to go to Supreme Court oral arguments. I want you to go to festivals down on the National Mall. I want to be able to go over the Kennedy Center and see performances and such. And so it's a place where, just like any other college campus, our students come in with one idea, they change their ideas while they're here, but they're doing that exploration through a process of real world iteration. And so it's a place where you can definitely have an exciting 4 years of study.
All right. Thank you all for your introductions. So just to help frame our conversation, we're going into the 3 main themes that we're going to be covering this evening, and each of our panelists will be a primary responder to one of the themes, giving some time and space for the other 2 to chime in if necessary. So we'll spend about 10 minutes on each of these themes. We'll be covering the testing landscape, application review, and time spent outside the classroom. After we conclude with the themes, at that point we will have the open Q&A. So we're going to talk about the testing landscape. Heath will be first one up.
Well, thanks. I'm really pleased to be talking about this topic because who doesn't want to talk about standardized tests? It's the most exciting part of the whole college admission process. And, I think about my own experience with standardized tests, and I'm now pretty far removed from that part of my life, and I really don't even remember it that well. And yet I know that for high school students who go through this process, it seems at that moment like it is the ultimate crucible of where you're going to go to college, and what the rest of your life, how the rest of your life might unfold. And so I think folks like us always try to bring the anxiety level down a little bit to say it is but one piece of the puzzle, and might not even be a piece of the puzzle, depending on how you go about this process. Standardized tests have long been the bane of students' existence. But I want to start with just a little, taking us back a little bit before the present day, because I think it's important to understand that standardized testing started out of the eugenics movement over a century ago, in an attempt to prove that white people are smarter than non-white people and to maintain order at so-called elite universities. And so it was fraught from the very beginning. And that's important to know because we have not overcome those barriers, even though we're still using the same system. All it's really proven over the years is who has money, because the single biggest correlated variable to success on tests is family income. And if you think about that, it makes a whole lot of sense, because families who have money may be able to afford to live in particular neighborhoods, or afford test prep, or afford private schools. And none of that has to do with a student's ability to thrive on a college campus. So it's problematic for colleges too. We know empirically that there is some predictive value when it comes to understanding first-year GPA. However, there isn't much by way of helping us understand how a student is likely to succeed in the long run. And we don't know more using tests than we already know by looking at a high school transcript. What has happened over time is many colleges have used this in a nefarious way. So a lot of colleges are doing some very heavy lifting right now to try to better use, if they use at all, this data point as part of a much larger matrix of understanding how a student might fare on a college campus. even if we know about the likelihood of success in the aggregate, how a particular student will fare in college is really hard to know based on that single data point. Again, the system is somewhat fraught. Almost any study that you see that supports use of standardized testing was probably conducted by a current or former College Board member. So you want to take these things with a grain of salt. Okay, so that's a little bit of history. Where are we now? There has been a movement toward test optional for a long time. And what happened was with the COVID pandemic, it hastened this or accelerated this process, right? The train had already left the station. In fact, Bowdoin College was the first college to offer test optional in 1969. It existed for decades, largely with smaller liberal arts schools. But again, this had been gaining steam for quite a while. So what does that even really mean? What is test optional? And when a college says that they're test optional, do they really mean it? So these are good questions to ask. First of all, understanding that there is a range when it comes to the testing landscape, there's a range. Some schools are going to require the submission of standardized tests. Some schools will give you an option whether you want to submit it at all. And other schools will have adopted what's known as a test-free policy, where they're not going to look at it even if you want them to. So understanding the various policies is really important. And then even within test optional, there's a range. And so you might be saying, well, that's great, but that doesn't really help me. And that's true. Yes, you need to investigate with each school what that really means. I'll give you an example. For us at TCU, we have something called a do no harm policy, meaning you can opt to submit your test scores. And if we believe it enhances your profile, we will use it. And if we believe it will not enhance your profile, we exclude it and don't consider it in our evaluation of an applicant. We think that that's the most student-centered approach to test optional. Other schools are a little bit different. The best thing you can do is ask the school, how do you use tests? You say that it's optional, but do you see a difference in the students who submit scores and don't submit scores in terms of their admission outcomes? For example, if 60% of your applicant pool is submitting tests, but 90% of your admit pool have tests, maybe that says something about how the college is using those scores. So you want to ask those questions. It's really important. It's going to be really interesting to see if the pendulum swings back. We know there's one highly selective institution, MIT, that already announced that they are now requiring tests again, even though they went test optional at the beginning of the pandemic. Some of the larger state schools whose legislatures are in bed with test agencies, frankly, they never dropped the testing requirement. So it'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out. What the research is showing so far is that most of the schools that went test optional during the pandemic either have continued a policy that began or have made it permanent. And most of us are in the process of sort of evaluating the efficacy of a test optional policy. So as you think about preparing for the college application process, should you take a standardized test? Yeah, you probably should, because you don't want to shut yourself off from a school that maybe you don't realize right now will be your top choice, but at the time might become your top choice. And if they require it, you don't want to be out of luck. So I would certainly encourage you to do that. Should you prepare? Yeah, you would, just like you would prepare for a math test or an English test. You definitely want to prepare. You don't want to walk in totally cold. Should you take the ACT or the SAT? That you should have a conversation with your counselor as to what the best policy for you is. I think a good rule of thumb usually is to take ACT once and take SAT once and see which one you feel better about, and perhaps consider retaking if you're able to. But again, you're going to lean on your college counselors, who will be a great resource for you. I'll say one more thing about the testing landscape, and that is, as more and more schools go test optional, what you have seen is the College Board, recognizing that they're losing market share, is starting to pump massive resources into their AP program. And there are lots of good reasons why a student might take an AP class if it's offered at their school. But I just think it's always important to understand the reasons why things are happening around you, and they're not always in the best interest of students. So,
Nikki, the floor is yours to talk about application review.
I really appreciate that this presentation itself is framed as a conversation. because that is often how I frame the application review process, as a conversation. So I have worked at, now this is my fourth institute. I started my admissions career at the University of Miami in Florida, moved on into a position in admissions at Rice University in Texas. And then after a few years at Rice, was offered an amazing opportunity at the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena, California, and honored to become their director of admission in 2019. Came into this role with enrollment management, now working with admission, financial aid, and the registrar in about a year and a half ago. And so I share this context so that you have an understanding of how and why I talk about the application review process in the way that I do. So I've worked now at schools that have had varying rates of application review, admission, et cetera. The one thing that has been consistent across all of these schools is that the application review process and the staff engaged in that process are basically engaging in a conversation about the students that are applying to our school. And so the reason I use conversation is because we are looking at, so you've probably heard the term holistic. And so when we are reviewing a student's application, we are talking about, and often literally talking about the entirety of what a student is bringing and will potentially bring to a college community, a college campus. And we are examining those characteristics of the student in the context of what the institution looks to bring in when they admit a student. So the consistent thing across the schools that I have been is that it is an enriching conversation in the application review process, and the decisions we make are based on what the institution we are at, what the institution has determined is among their priorities, and what represents their school and their institution. So context matters. The most really famous answer you could get from an admission officer these days is it depends. And in the application review process, it really does. So that is why you'll see students that will, when you see one profile, if they apply to various schools, you're going to end up with different decisions, and often unpredictable decisions, because this is very much a human-centered process, humans looking at and discussing your candidacy and your strengths for their institution. And it is about your candidacy at that particular place. So I think especially in working with the college counseling team that you have, which they are fantastic resources in this profession. And I'm not saying that just I'm doing this out of volunteer and love. So I say that with a lot of love that the SI community is very fortunate to have your college counseling resources. So I imagine that when you talk with them more about your process and about your candidacy to different schools, that is how come you are going to look at a range of places, because the decisions are going to be markedly different. And so much of that just depends on what the institution is holding as priorities and objectives. So then back to the review process itself, it's a conversation. So we will receive your materials. The school will have asked you a variety of questions. Often those questions reflect what's important to that school, which is why some schools will ask you one question and the others won't. And maybe they might ask you similar questions, but worded in different ways. And you really want to pay attention to that because it does reflect what the school is trying to achieve when it offers admission to the students that it does. So we receive those materials, we receive all of that information from you, from your school, from counselors, teachers, so from the variety of people that support you through this process. And then the admissions staff, the admissions committee are trained to synthesize all of that information. And then we will, and this happens in various ways at different institutions, but really to me, the core of it is the same. We receive that information and we discuss that student amongst our colleagues, and we speak very much to the students' strengths, their fit, and across all of the institutions I worked for, there is a fierce level of advocacy that happens that people never know about, because the students will only ever see one decision in the end, which I always regret about this work. That students, you'll never know what those conversations are shaped like. You will never know the angst that you put us through, the various emotions that you will have the committee going through as we take in your story. We get to get a glimpse into who you are and a glimpse into who you'll be in college. We'll get to celebrate your story with you, but often, especially for institutions that say no more than yes, you would never know that you will have made such an impact as you did. So I offer that so that students are aware that however these decisions pan out, please know that there is a whole host of humans on the other side of this process that have appreciated your story and appreciated and loved the time that you've given to the process. But in the end, ideally, you have a number of different decisions, and then you get to pick some place to go. So I tell students that it's a conversation. Give us things to talk about. Connect the dots for us. You know, if you are very much convinced that you really want to be at the institution that you have applied to, don't leave us with a lot of guesswork. Tell us exactly how and why. That's what these questions are designed to do. So make those connections, and we will make a lot of our own connections as well. The other part of this application review process that I'll touch on is when you're applying, there is consideration and thought behind the academic pathway that you are headed towards, or that you tell the institution that you're headed towards. That will vary school to school. So there will be some schools where there will be more specialized information required. So I'll take, for instance, if you're applying to an architecture program, you might be asked for more than the core application pieces, because the architecture faculty might be looking for a particular skill set as they are making these decisions. That goes with like music as well. Of course, there will be consideration around the major that you intend to go to. So as much as you can, and as much as the school might ask, you will want to speak to why, not only just this, you want to speak to why the school and why that major, and give examples. Again, connect those dots for us. For whatever reason though, you are like many students in the world, and many of us who are adults and still trying to figure life out, if you are still deciding, that's okay too. The school will often tell you how somebody who is still deciding is reviewed in the process, but more often than not, and at least at the institutions I've been to, if a student is still deciding, when we offer admission to that student is because we are confident that they are going to succeed in whatever major they choose. And so we sort of leave the world open to them, and we start it with that admission offer.
Yeah. Last but not least, right? We've talked about testing landscape. We've talked about academic application review in general. Let's talk about the time spent outside the classroom. Ben, floor is yours.
Yeah, and I think this is a perfect addition to what Nikki was just introducing to you, right? How does an admissions committee come up with assessment of who you are, what you can contribute, and how you will hopefully succeed in our classroom environments? When each of us introduced our institutions, we gave you certain descriptors of our student body, right? We gave you descriptors of the students who tend to thrive on our campuses. And so, we're making a decision both on academic credentials, but on who the individual is and how we hope that individual will join a community of fellow students. And I think it's really important, because sometimes in the college application process, we freak out about all the wrong things, right? We freak out about the testing environment, and I have a 31 ACT. Should I send my score to TCU or not, right? And, should I take it again? Or like, oh, I don't know if my GPA is high enough. At the end of the day, those things aren't changing, right? That is your record, and the place where you can really craft your application is both in your essay and then also how you share your activities that you're involved with, which, you know, it's important. And we're going to talk about, you know, what you choose to do, but also know that your application is a portfolio and you have a voice in how you share those items to us, right? And let's just take an easy example. You know, I was in National Honor Society in high school. It was on my application. It was an award, not an involvement. That is not true at every single school. At some schools, it's an incredibly engaged and active club and organization that does peer tutoring and all sorts of great things. And without a student kind of helping us understand, let's say, which version of it is, it's hard for us from the outside world to be able to discern those differences, right? And so, you know, we want students that are pursuing passions. You know, trying to, let's say, pull together a list of activities because you think they will sound impressive, we will unfortunately see through that quite quickly. And not because we're skeptical, because the totality of the application won't all be singing the same tune, right? Your school and your counselors and your teachers, they're submitting letters of recommendation on your behalf. You know, in most of those letters, they're talking about you both as a student, but also how you contribute to the environment. And most likely that thing that you're most passionate about is also going to show up in those letters as well. And it's helping to reinforce those messages and give us a glimpse of how you're contributing in your environment. We want you to be pursuing your passion because we want you to be fulfilled. We want you to be happy, right? You know, sometimes we see this thing about passion versus performance sometimes actually in the academic side as well. Many students will come into college and they will choose a major based on the subject area they get the best grades in, because it feels good to get good grades. And it feels good to have your parents happy that you're getting good grades. But it actually may not be your life's passion. And the area that you might be getting B's in is the area that you find really interesting. And we don't want to create an environment where we say like, well, no, we're going to steer you away from that, right? And the same thing is true with what you do outside the classroom, right? So again, you know, don't try to be pulling together things because you think they will sound impressive. Instead, be doing things that speak to who you want to be and speak to things that you get enjoyment out of, because that's what rings true in an application, right? In that admissions committee, you know, in each of our offices, I guarantee you, no staff member ever runs into Heath's office, runs into Nikki's office and says, you got to look at this transcript. They got a 4.0, right? We've seen tens of thousands of transcripts. It's, you know, it's not that we're diminishing it, but it doesn't stand out. But when we see a student who's really, you know, anchored themselves in something, they've started their own business, they've taken and tackled some problem, those are the stories that create the emotions that Nikki was just talking about in those admissions committee discussions, right? And so, you know, we want you to be feeling fulfilled, because the more you feel fulfilled, the better you will shine in our application process. And the more that you're writing and the different components of your application will all ring together. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about what I call formal versus informal time outside the classroom. And I think one of the benefits on the college application process of the pandemic is that I think we as institutions are much more open to a wider range of consideration of how we see that time, right? I think, you know, historically, and you even see it in how the Common Application is built. It asks you, what involvement are you in? What years of school are you doing it? How many hours per week? How many weeks per year? All that kind of got shattered. Imagine if you were actively involved in theater and tech crew, and you'd been doing that for a number of years. And then, you know, next year you were going to be the stage manager. And then the pandemic happened and just made that impossible, right? And all of us, you know, and, you know, we sometimes joke about our COVID hobbies. You know, for example, I'm on day 855 of my Duolingo streak. I sit here in this basement, right? My house was built in 1951, not built for two people to be working from home. And so, I taught myself how to install a basement floor on YouTube and did that myself, right? Many of you went through these same journeys of like picking things up, forming communities online and connecting with people, right? All these different sort of things that do not come within the walls of a traditional high school involvement. And I think because all of your application readers have gone through this experience as well, we are much more open, we are much more accepting of these more what I would call individual pursuits, entrepreneurial pursuits, self investment of like, hey, I want to learn this just because it's something that I find interesting, right? And so just knowing that there is space for that in the application, we are happy to hear the things that you do that maybe don't fit within a more traditionally defined box of what an involvement is. And so, keep these things in mind as we look at this application, because it truly is a portfolio of your life, right? And some of those portfolio items are already more or less created and waiting for you. Your transcript is a good example of that. And some of these things, they exist in the raw materials, let's say the things that you've been involved with so far, but how you pull that together, how you explain those things is really important, right? And then the last part of it, which we might talk about in the Q&A and such, I imagine, is your essay, where you're really going to be able to think about what I want to accomplish with this part of the application. And so that as admissions officers, we can balance all three different ones as we think about how do we evaluate this application, and how do we decide who are those students we want to welcome to our campus in the future.
Then that allows us to transition right into our open Q&A. So we got a little over 10 minutes to do the Q&A. Start with Chat GPT. We know that this has been sort of if I had to identify sort of like the new hot topic that's come up in the admissions landscape, this has got to be it. So it's timely that the first question in our Q&A. It's on how will Chat GPT change the application process, specifically with the essays?
And I've got two immediate thoughts which counter each other. So we'll see which one ends up prevailing. One, and this is sort of my, I don't know if this is a Pollyanna view of it, we are assuming the best in students. Part of this process is an assumption that a student is not submitting fraudulent material. And this, you could extend it beyond ChatGPT. A student, just as Ben was talking about the activities that a student might participate in, we can't always verify that a student has done everything that is listed on the activities resume and for the number of hours and weeks and years that has happened, but we are trusting a student to abide by their honor in putting forward an application. So I think there's an element of trust that will have to continue to take place, because I don't think that college admission officers, as smart as we are and as well trained as we are always going to be able to tell the difference between human work and AI, because the AI is pretty good. So that's number one. Number two, actually, so I had three thoughts. Number two is I am already hearing about anti-AI AI. In fact, it specifically things that we in admissions can leverage to try to detect some of this stuff. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. So that's number two. My counter thought is I could imagine that there will be a college or two who maybe lean into this and say, all right, look, this is out there. Produce the best ChatGPT essay that you can for us. Let's see what you really got. In that way, it could totally remove the advantage, right? Put everyone on the same playing field. So that's a little bit of the skeptic in me, but also I think a pretty interesting idea. So I didn't answer any questions really, but just a few thoughts.
So the thing I would add is that I actually don't think it's that impressive. I think we are amazed by it because it's novel and new, and it's impressive of how quickly it can pump stuff out. But when you actually read any of the output, it basically just brings you to the middle of the bell curve. And at that point, as you think about your application, that's my one place where I really can take full control. And I'm not sure I want to give that up to a machine. And then at the same time, as Heath was mentioning, you know, I am highly confident that our ability to test materials for AI will exist, right? You know, and this probably happens in your high school. It happens definitely at GW. When you submit a paper, it goes through a plagiarism detection software piece. I'm very confident within, you know, a short order of months that there will also be a check for anti-AI through those same software packages, right? And again, not that I think we're not looking out to catch people. We're not assuming that everyone's doing so, just because I think it's actually the wrong choice if you're trying to advocate for yourself in your application. You know, I have had the thought of like, you know, and you all get, you know, I'm going to just guess 25 emails a day from different colleges. I've thought to myself like, hey, we could just outsource that to that, right? And, you know, and I think as a society, we are going to face some choices about how do we use this as a tool. And I think back to the graphing calculator in, you know, calculus, that, you know, there was definitely people that said like, we shouldn't allow those whatsoever. And then people said like, well, we can master content faster and we can cover more material by giving them a more efficient tool, right? And I think the next couple of years and the years that you all are in college is probably where some of those things are going to get figured out. But again, I just don't think I'm going to take the risk on my application and my future that I'm going to give away my voice to someone else. Because that's the one place I have complete control of the application I put forward.
Someone that asked specifically, you talked about fit. Someone asked if you can give an example of what fit means. It did ask about the schools, but I think you can kind of address it in general, just kind of unpacking the term fit, because obviously you're right. It depends, right? Depending on the institution, but I think perhaps you can give a little bit more nuance to like what fit might mean, because you alluded to some of it from the different places you've worked at.
So the example I'll use, actually, I will use a pointed example. Fit is really about what the student is looking for and what the institution will be able to deliver. When we see that there is synergy in that, we've got something good going. Schools that offer broad will of course be more fit for more students. Schools that offer things that are very narrow will really be fit for a particular niche of students. And I feel very fortunate that I've worked now across the range of. So I feel like maybe an example that might help is from the school that has been the most niche for me, Caltech. It was really interesting because people knew Caltech in different ways. People often mixed Caltech up with other institutions in California. But if you were really a STEM, like you were in it to win it STEM kind of person, then you knew Caltech. And then people thought that if I love STEM, then I'll love Caltech. And now having worked there, we talked a lot about this as a staff and with the students, and as we were making selections, we realized that it wasn't just about loving STEM. For a fit with Caltech, the student had to love STEM in a particular kind of way that Caltech loves STEM. And the most pointed piece of it that we would lift out for students is to really ask them, how much do you love math? So I was a humanities major. I don't love math that same way, but I can recognize students who love math, because wherever you land in Caltech, math will be in your life. There is no escaping it. And it's not just math itself. It is a particular kind of math that you don't come across often in secondary and high schools. It's proof-based abstract math, which I give a lot of credit to people if that's what they do. It's not my jam. So so fit really started to embrace the nuance and narrow it down so that students understood that when we were making selections, it wasn't just about looking at a student's academic performance in math. It was getting all of those other hints around it that maybe even if a student has never experienced proof-based math, when we put them with our faculty and in the classroom, they were gonna be okay. Fit it can really get down into some different layers and levels depending on the institution. For Caltech, it happened to really get down into those layers because it's also a very small institution. And then I think about sort of on another side of that range, the school that I currently am with, UH Manoa, where we offer an entire range of liberal arts, engineering, science, math, and we have a much bigger student body, and so the story of fit it casts a much wider net, but that is by design. So that was by design for Caltech. That's by design for UH Manoa.
Okay, we got a few more minutes before I'll leave you all with your parting thoughts. So I want to see if we can get through these last couple of questions. A question about how do campus visits affect an applicant's admissions success?
Yeah, this is a great question, and one that you should feel confident and unashamed to ask each and every college that you're considering, because it's going to be a range of different outcomes. Many schools will use what they call demonstrate interest, and they'll have their own kind of internal definition they've come up with that, where they might use that as a factor in their committee conversations and as a tiebreaker in and how they make some of these decisions. Now, there are problems with doing that as well, right? So let's say if we use campus visits as an indicator of interest, I am a 5-hour flight, as is, Nikki's institution. So you may be less likely to, just because it's really expensive to have a family come out and visit a school versus a school that you can drive down the street to see. And so, at my institution, we actually don't use it at all in how we make our decisions, because we found it had a, socioeconomic negative impact on what we were trying to do with the class we were trying to build. And there are most likely admissions officers who are at schools that use demonstrated interest, and they have a number of reasons that they believe it is important and it helps them through. And different schools are going to have different opinions, and I think it's just, you should know, don't be afraid to ask this question, because you just need to know what rules of the game you're playing as you go forward.
I would add to Ben's excellent response that it can be helpful, as he mentioned, from a sort of demonstrated interest side. But the other way to look at this is it could be helpful to you just purely in trying to understand whether you're going to be a good fit, as Nikki was talking about, for the institution. So there's the benefit there. If you're thinking, should I or shouldn't I would say, yes, think about it strategically, but more so think about it as how it can help shape your decision of whether you ultimately want to apply to that school or not.
We're gonna do one more question. This is a big one, but as brief as you all can sort of address. Let's say a student has gone through some kind of medical event, right? Obviously impacted their grades, impacted their ability to get involved in activities. Obviously, they're very determined to continue education. How do they best, reflect this in their application?
This is going to be a very individual decision, and I think it's important to know that there is no obligation for you to share something you don't want to share, right? This is your application. I think this is one of these things of, we are going to be looking at your record. We might see some different trends in your grades and such. We're going to go look for evidence to try to understand that, right? So, in addition to the essay and the application, there's a, kind of a additional information section that, you can kind of use if you feel you want to explain something, you want to provide some of that additional background. Again, that's an individual decision to make. It's one that, you should make as a family. It's one that you should make in consultation with your college counselors at your school. It may be something that you would like them to kind of share something on your behalf or not, right? And so just to make sure that we're all being open and transparent through this part of the process.
Our panelists have mentioned reach out, right? This is an opportunity. We're lucky to have 3 decision makers from different campuses, but those are some of the questions that came up there. Know that you can reach out to the campus, you can get those questions. But I want to make sure that I give sort of a lightning round here, real brief. Each of our panelists will start with Ben, go with Nikki, and then end with Heath. words of wisdom, parting tip.
Yeah, so I think for me, sometimes we can get really focused on one school through this process, right? I was denied at my first choice college. My life is still awesome and fantastic. And quite honestly, in a couple more years, I probably won't even be able to recall what was that school that denied me to. It was McGill, but I'm still getting over it. Everything makes sense. Everything works out. So in the moment, you're going to have your heartstrings pulled and things of that nature, but just know that no matter where you end up, it's about you showing up and you making the most of that experience, not the name of the school that you're at.
I'm going to dovetail off of Ben's reference to heartstrings. And so my advice is for the parents, family members, and all the supporting roles of those around the student, as they are having said heartstrings tugged. My advice to all of you is to love your student. Just love them. Love them the best way that you know how, the best way that they know to be loved. If you know their love language, this is a really good time to speak it. And, simply be there, be their grounding, be their balance, be there for all of the victories and all of the other emotions that this process is going to bring out in all of us. But I mean, after doing this for this long, I'm still a fan of making sure that we put lots and lots of love into this process, and just all the best to all of you.
Well, Nikki stole exactly what I was going to say, so I guess I'm going to have to go with something else. But luckily, there's a lot of advice to dispense. So I think, landing on a similar theme to Ben and Nikki, and that is, there's a lot of noise out there. And it can be overwhelming, especially as you advance toward this process. And it seems like every conversation will center around the college admission process. Every relative, every friend, it will be the hallway chatter. It will come across your social media feeds. Every article you read will seem to be about it, and it can paralyze you. And so to the students, my strong advice is to try to minimize that noise and focus on what's in your heart, and think about the people whose opinions really matter to you. Because it can be really easy to listen to that hallway chatter and start to think things about yourself and start to doubt yourself and the choices that your instincts tell you should be making. So I heard this great phrase just a few weeks ago from a colleague in college admissions. So it's not mine, but I think it's worth repeating. And that is, if they're not paying for you or praying for you, then ignore what they have to say about you. All right. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you all. We appreciate you all joining us.